Golden Retriever and her puppies, thrown from moving car on a snowy night. Something inexplicable happens. The wind howled through the desolate countryside, sweeping flurries of snow across the icy road. Darkness blanketed the landscape, broken only by the faint golden glow spilling from the windows of Daniel Thompson's farmhouse. Inside, Daniel sat in his worn armchair, a steaming mug of coffee cradled between his hands as he watched the snowstorm rage outside. He was a man of quiet routines, his days structured and uneventful since his retirement from teaching high school literature. The farmhouse was empty now, echoing with a stillness that had settled in after his wife, Margaret, passed away 3 winters ago. Daniel had grown accustomed to the solitude, yet nights like this made the house feel unbearably hollow. He sighed, his breath fogging the glass as he leaned closer to the window. It was hard not to remember how Margaret used to wrap herself in her favorite red shawl, standing by this very window, her eyes sparkling as she watched the snow fall. She loved winter, loved the way the world seemed to slow down, the way the snow blanketed the earth in peaceful silence. Daniel turned away, shaking off the ache in his chest. Those memories felt like ghosts haunting every corner of this old house. He focused on his coffee, letting its warmth seep into his hands, grounding him in the present. Just as he sank back into his chair, the faint roar of an engine broke through the storm's howl. It was unusual for anyone to be out on a night like this, especially on the isolated road leading to his farmhouse. Curiosity piqued, Daniel set his mug down and peered through the frost-kissed window. The dim outline of a vehicle appeared at the edge of his driveway, headlights slicing through the snow as it sped down the road. Daniel's eyes narrowed. The car was moving too fast for the weather conditions, its tires skidding on the slick pavement. His chest tightened with unease as the vehicle swerved dangerously close to the ditch before regaining control. As it raced past his house, a dark object was thrown from the passenger window, tumbling through the air before landing in a snowbank on the roadside. The car didn't slow down. It accelerated, its red taillights vanishing into the night, leaving nothing but swirling snow in its wake. Daniel's heart thudded. What had they thrown out? Garbage? Something heavier by the way it had landed. He squinted through the glass, straining to see, but the snow was already covering whatever lay by the roadside. Instinct urged him to turn away, to let it be someone else's problem. But something nagged at him, a gut feeling he couldn't shake. Grabbing his heavy coat and wool hat, Daniel slipped on his snow boots, the familiar creak of leather and rubber grounding him in the cold reality of what he was about to do. Outside, the storm was brutal, icy wind biting at his face as he trudged through knee-high drifts toward the road. The snow was relentless, stinging his eyes as he shielded his face with his gloved hand. It took him longer than expected to reach the snowbank, where the object lay half-buried. For a moment, all he saw was a shapeless mound covered in snow. But then it moved, a faint shiver, barely noticeable against the wind's ferocity. Daniel's pulse quickened. Kneeling in the snow, he brushed away the icy layer with trembling hands, his breath catching as he uncovered a golden patch of fur. It was a dog, a golden retriever, lying motionless, her body curled protectively around 4 tiny puppies pressed against her belly. Daniel's chest tightened as he took in the scene. The mother dog's fur was matted with snow and ice, her body trembling violently as she tried to shield her pups from the cold. Her eyes flickered open, glazed with exhaustion and fear, locking on to Daniel's with a desperate plea for help. "Oh, God," he whispered, his voice breaking against the howling wind. He reached out cautiously, his gloved hand hovering just above her head. She didn't flinch, didn't growl. She was too weak to resist. Daniel's heart ached at the sight of her. Someone had thrown her out like garbage, discarded her and her helpless puppies in the middle of a snowstorm. Fury surged through him, burning hot despite the cold. How could anyone be so cruel? The thought was bitter on his tongue, but he had no time for anger. The mother dog was fading, her eyes growing heavy as her shivering slowed. "No, no, stay with me," Daniel urged, his voice firm as he shrugged off his coat, wrapping it around her and the puppies. The wind cut through his flannel shirt, stealing his body heat, but he ignored it, carefully lifting the fragile family into his arms. The puppies whimpered, their tiny bodies trembling as they pressed closer to their mother's warmth. Daniel held them close, shielding them from the wind as he trudged back toward the farmhouse. His legs burned with each step, the snow pulling at his boots like quicksand, but he refused to stop. The mother dog's head rested limply against his chest, her breath shallow and uneven. "You're gonna make it," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I won't let you die out here." By the time he reached his front porch, his muscles screamed with exhaustion, his fingers numb from the cold. Kicking the door open, Daniel stumbled inside, the warmth of the house wrapping around him like a blanket. He moved quickly, laying the mother dog and her puppies by the fireplace, where the heat radiated softly against their frost-bitten bodies. He piled blankets around them, his hands shaking as he tucked the fabric snugly around their tiny forms. The mother dog stirred, her eyes fluttering open as she looked up at him with a glimmer of gratitude. "You're safe now," Daniel whispered, brushing a hand gently over her head. "I've got you." The puppies wriggled closer to their mother, their whimpers fading as they nestled into the warmth. Daniel watched them, his heart pounding as the weight of what had happened settled over him. Someone had tried to kill them, had thrown them out to die in the cold without a second thought. Anger and sorrow twisted together inside him, but another feeling emerged, stronger than the rest, a fierce determination. He didn't know who could be so heartless, but he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't going to let them win. As the snowstorm raged outside, Daniel sat vigil by the fire, his eyes never leaving the fragile family lying before him. He didn't know their story, but he knew they had been sent to him for a reason, and as long as he had breath in his body, he would protect them. The morning light crept slowly across the farmhouse, pale and cold, illuminating the fragile scene by the fireplace. Daniel hadn't slept. He sat on the worn rug, his back against the couch, watching the golden retriever breathe in shallow, uneven rhythms. Her puppies were huddled tightly against her belly, their tiny bodies quivering as they sought warmth. Daniel's coat was still wrapped around them, his scent mingling with the faint smell of smoke from the fireplace. The storm had eased during the night, but the cold lingered, pressing against the windows and seeping through the old wooden floors. Daniel's bones ached from exhaustion, but he couldn't bring himself to leave their side. He'd spent the night listening to the mother dog's labored breaths, terrified that she might slip away before morning. She was still alive, but barely, her body too weak to lift her head. Daniel ran a hand through his graying hair, his fingers shaking. He'd always prided himself on being able to solve problems, to think things through rationally. But this was something different. He'd never seen an animal in such a state, never felt this kind of helplessness. He didn't even know if they would survive. His gaze drifted to the puppies, their tiny bodies wriggling in search of milk. The mother tried to nuzzle them closer, but her limbs trembled with the effort, her eyes glazing over with exhaustion. "Easy, girl," Daniel murmured, his voice soft. "Save your strength." The dog's amber eyes flicked toward him, a spark of trust flickering through the haze of pain. Daniel's chest tightened. He felt an overwhelming need to protect her, to make sure she never suffered again. Determined not to let them die, he rose to his feet, his legs stiff from sitting too long. The farmhouse felt colder without the fire's warmth as he moved to the kitchen, the silence pressing in on him. He rummaged through the cupboards, pulling out a small saucepan and filling it with water. Setting it on the stove, he turned the burner to low, his mind racing. He needed to get nourishment into the puppies, but he had no idea how to care for such tiny creatures. Margaret would have known. She had always been the one with a gentle touch, the one who nursed sick animals back to health whenever they wandered onto the property. Daniel's throat tightened at the memory, but he shook it off, focusing on the task at hand. He found an old medicine dropper in the bathroom cabinet, a remnant of his wife's herbal remedies, and cleaned it thoroughly before returning to the kitchen. The water was warm now, steam curling up from the pan. He poured it into a bowl and mixed it with powdered milk he found in the pantry, creating a makeshift formula. It wasn't ideal, but it was all he had. Carrying the bowl and dropper back to the living room, Daniel knelt beside the fireplace, his heart pounding with worry. The puppies were so small, so fragile. He chose the weakest one first, a little runt with fur the color of autumn leaves. Its tiny mouth opened and closed, a faint whimper escaping as it nuzzled blindly at his fingers. Daniel's chest tightened as he held the dropper to the puppy's lips, gently squeezing a drop of milk onto its tongue. The puppy's nose twitched, its mouth moving instinctively as it tasted the warm liquid. "That's it," Daniel whispered, his voice trembling. "Come on, little one." He fed each puppy slowly, drop by drop, his hands shaking from the tension. They were so delicate, their bodies fitting easily in his palm. He was terrified of hurting them, of doing something wrong, but they were hungry, their tiny tongues lapping eagerly at the milk. The mother dog watched him through half-closed eyes, her body limp with exhaustion. "You did good, girl," Daniel murmured, stroking her head gently. "They're fighters, just like you." Her eyes fluttered, a faint sigh escaping her as she leaned into his touch. For a moment, Daniel could have sworn she understood him, that she knew he was trying to save her family. It stirred something inside him, a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt in years. The puppies curled back against their mother after feeding, their bellies round and full. Daniel tucked the blanket more securely around them, his shoulders relaxing as they settled into a deep sleep. But the mother dog's breathing was still shallow, her body trembling as the cold gripped her weakened limbs. Daniel frowned, his worry deepening. She needed help, real help, more than he could give her here. He grabbed his phone from the kitchen counter, his fingers stiff as he dialed the number for the local vet. It rang twice before a tired voice answered. Dr. Myers speaking. "Doc, it's Daniel Thompson. I need your help. I found a dog last night. Someone threw her and her puppies out on the road. She's in bad shape." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "They did what? Are they still alive?" "Barely," Daniel replied, his voice cracking. "The puppies are hanging on, but the mother, she's hurt bad. I think her leg's broken, and she's freezing." Dr. Myers didn't hesitate. "Get them here now. I'll meet you at the clinic." Relief washed over Daniel, his shoulders sagging as the line went dead. He moved quickly, bundling the mother dog and her puppies into his old duffel bag, lining it with blankets to keep them warm. She whimpered softly as he lifted her, her head resting limply against his arm. "Hold on, girl," he whispered, his voice rough. "We're gonna get you help." The drive to the clinic was agonizingly slow, the snow still thick on the roads. Daniel's hands gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white as he navigated the icy curves. He kept glancing at the bag in the passenger seat, watching the puppies squirm and whimper as the mother tried to curl protectively around them. He could feel her fading, her breath growing fainter with each passing minute. Panic clawed at him, his chest tightening as he pressed harder on the gas. "Don't you dare give up," he muttered, his eyes stinging. "I didn't find you just to lose you now." By the time he reached the clinic, his heart was pounding, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Dr. Myers was waiting outside, bundled in a thick coat, her face pale with worry. She took one look at the duffel bag and sprang into action, guiding Daniel inside as she called for her assistant. They moved quickly, lifting the mother dog onto the examination table as the puppies were placed in a heated incubator. Daniel stood helplessly at the door, his chest aching as he watched Dr. Myers work, her hands steady and sure as she examined the mother's injured leg. He felt a strange sense of fear and hope, his heart breaking as he realized how much he wanted them to live. For the first time since Margaret passed, Daniel prayed. He prayed for the mother dog, for her puppies, for the chance to save them. And as he stood there trembling in the sterile light of the clinic, he realized that maybe, just maybe, they were saving him too. The clinic was cold and sterile, its white walls reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights that buzzed quietly above. Daniel paced the narrow hallway, his boots scuffing against the linoleum floor as he tried to calm the storm of worry twisting in his gut. Through the small window of the examination room, he could see Dr. Myers working tirelessly, her movements quick and precise as she tended to the injured mother dog. The puppies were safe for now, nestled in the heated incubator, their tiny bodies curled together for warmth. But the mother, her breathing had grown dangerously shallow, her chest rising and falling in ragged gasps. Daniel's hands shook as he leaned against the wall, his heart pounding as he remembered the way she had looked up at him with those pleading eyes. She was fighting to stay alive, fighting for her babies, and he felt utterly powerless. The door creaked open, and Dr. Myers stepped into the hallway, her face drawn and weary. She pulled off her gloves, stuffing them into the pocket of her lab coat as she met Daniel's gaze. Her leg is fractured, she said, her voice low. I've set the bone and wrapped it, but she's badly malnourished and severely hypothermic. I've given her fluids and started warming her slowly, but it's touch and go. The next 24 hours are critical. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat tight. Will she make it? The vet hesitated, her eyes softening. I don't know, but she's a fighter. If she can hold on through the night, she has a chance. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle. You did the right thing bringing them here, Daniel. You gave her a fighting chance. A lump formed in his throat, and Daniel looked away, blinking back the sting of tears. He hadn't cried in years, not since Margaret's funeral, and the emotion hit him like a punch to the chest. He took a shuddering breath, his fingers curling into fists as he struggled to regain control. Can I see her? He asked, his voice rough. Dr. Myers nodded, pushing the door open wider. She's resting now. I gave her something for the pain. Just keep your voice low. She needs all the strength she can get. Daniel stepped into the room, his heart pounding as he approached the examination table. The mother dog lay on her side, her body wrapped in thick blankets, an IV drip attached to her front leg. Her fur was still matted and dirty, but someone had cleaned her face, revealing soft golden fur beneath the grime. Her eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling with slow, labored breaths. The sight of her like this, so fragile, so vulnerable, brought a fresh wave of anger crashing through him. How could someone be so heartless? How could they throw her away like garbage, along with her innocent puppies? Daniel clenched his jaw, his hands trembling as he gently stroked her head. You're safe now, he whispered, his voice cracking. Nobody's ever going to hurt you again. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment her eyes opened, amber and glassy with pain. She looked at him, her gaze softening as she let out a faint whimper. Daniel's heart twisted, his chest aching as she nestled her head against his hand. She was trusting him, leaning on him for comfort, for safety. It broke something inside him, a wall he didn't even know was there. He stayed with her for a long time, his fingers brushing gently through her fur as he whispered soft words of reassurance. He told her about his wife, about how Margaret had always wanted a dog, how she used to say that animals were little pieces of God's love wrapped in fur. His voice wavered as he spoke, the memories flooding back, raw and vivid. He remembered Margaret's laughter, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled, the warmth of her hand in his. She was gone now, her absence a hollow ache that had settled in his bones. But as he sat beside this broken dog, he felt her presence, soft and comforting, like a whisper in the wind. The puppies began to stir in the incubator, their tiny cries breaking the quiet. Daniel looked up, his heart lurching as he watched them wriggle and whimper, their little bodies pressing against each other for comfort. They were so small, so helpless. He moved to the incubator, his breath fogging the glass as he watched them paw at each other, their eyes still closed, their ears folded tight against their heads. They looked like bundles of golden fluff, fragile and beautiful. One of them let out a pitiful squeak, its tiny mouth opening as it nuzzled the air, searching for its mother. Daniel's chest tightened, his heart breaking all over again. They needed her. They needed her warmth, her scent, her milk. They needed her love. A soft touch on his shoulder made him jump, and he turned to find Dr. Myers watching him, her expression gentle. They're fighters just like their mom, she said quietly. I'm feeding them every few hours. They're weak, but they've got a good chance. And if their mom pulls through, they'll be okay. Daniel nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He couldn't explain it, but he felt connected to them, bound by some invisible thread. They were his responsibility now. He couldn't walk away, couldn't turn his back on them. I'll take them home, he said suddenly, his voice firm. All of them. When she's well enough, they'll come home with me. Dr. Myers looked at him for a long moment, something softening in her eyes. Are you sure? Daniel met her gaze, his shoulders straightening. Yes, they're not going to end up alone again. I won't let that happen. A faint smile touched her lips, and she nodded. All right, I'll keep them here a few more days just to be safe. But once they're strong enough, They're yours. Relief flooded him, his knees nearly buckling as the weight of his decision settled over him. It was crazy. He didn't know the first thing about raising puppies, about taking care of an injured dog, but he knew he couldn't let them go. He turned back to the mother dog, her body curled beneath the blankets, her breathing still labored but steady. She looked so small, so delicate, but there was a quiet strength about her, a resilience that reminded him of Margaret. His hands shook as he stroked her head, his fingers brushing through her tangled fur. "I'm going to take care of you," he whispered, his voice thick. "You and your babies. I promise." The dog sighed softly, her body relaxing under his touch, her eyes closing as she drifted into a deep, healing sleep. Daniel stayed beside her until the lights dimmed and the clinic grew quiet, his heart thudding steadily in his chest. He was terrified, uncertain of what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt alive. And as he watched the fragile rise and fall of her chest, he realized that saving her might just save him too. The snow had stopped by the time Daniel pulled into his driveway, the world around him blanketed in a pristine layer of white. The air was sharp and cold, his breath fogging the windshield as he turned off the engine and sat for a moment, his eyes drifting to the empty passenger seat. It felt strange driving home alone after everything that had happened. He could still feel the warmth of the mother dog's body cradled in his arms, still hear the faint whimpers of her puppies echoing in his ears. The house loomed before him, silent and hollow, its windows dark against the pale morning light. Daniel's chest tightened. It was just a house, four walls and a roof, but it felt emptier now, like it was waiting for something, someone. He shook his head, his fingers gripping the steering wheel as he fought against the strange wave of loneliness that swept over him. It was foolish, he knew. He had lived alone for 3 years ever since Margaret passed. He should be used to it by now. But something about those puppies, about the way the mother dog had looked at him with those pleading eyes. It stirred something inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. With a sigh, Daniel climbed out of the truck, his boots crunching through the snow as he made his way to the front porch. He fumbled with his keys, his fingers stiff from the cold, and pushed the door open, the familiar creak echoing through the empty house. The warmth from the fireplace still lingered, the faint smell of smoke curling through the air as he stepped inside, closing the door against the chill. Everything was just as he had left it, blankets piled by the hearth, his coffee mug half full on the table, his coat draped over the armchair. But the house felt different now, quieter somehow, like it was holding its breath. Daniel's gaze drifted to the fireplace, his chest tightening as he pictured the mother dog lying there, her fragile body curled protectively around her puppies. He could almost see them, tiny bundles of golden fur, their little faces pressed against her belly as they nursed. His throat tightened, a strange ache blooming in his chest. He missed them. The realization hit him like a punch, and Daniel sank into the armchair, his head falling into his hands. He had known them for less than a day, had held them for only a few hours, but they had already burrowed their way into his heart. He remembered the way the mother dog had looked at him, her eyes filled with pain and trust, the way her puppies had nuzzled against his fingers, their tiny bodies warm and soft. They were counting on him, depending on him to protect them, to keep them safe. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on him, heavy and overwhelming. But beneath the fear, beneath the worry, there was something else. Hope. For the first time since Margaret died, Daniel felt like he had a purpose, like his life meant something again. He sat there for a long time, his heart pounding as he replayed the events of the night over and over. The car speeding down the road, the mother dog lying broken and cold in the snow, the helpless cries of her puppies. Someone had tried to kill them. Someone had thrown them away like trash. Anger flared in his chest, hot and fierce, his fists clenching as he thought of the person responsible. How could anyone be so cruel? How could they look at that gentle creature, at her innocent puppies, and feel nothing? Daniel's jaw tightened, his body trembling with rage. He wanted to find them, to look them in the eye and make them understand what they had done. But he knew it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't help the mother dog, wouldn't save her puppies. The only thing he could do now was keep his promise. He had vowed to protect them, to give them a chance at life, and he wasn't going to let them down. Pushing himself to his feet, Daniel moved to the fireplace, feeding the dying embers with another log before heading to the kitchen. His mind raced as he moved through the house, gathering supplies, old blankets, towels, a shallow pan for water. He found an empty box in the attic, lining it with soft fabric to make a bed for the puppies. It felt good to stay busy, to keep his hands moving as his thoughts whirled. He could picture them here, filling the house with life and noise, their tiny paws skittering across the hardwood floor, their playful yips echoing through the hallways. For the first time in years, Daniel found himself smiling, his heart fluttering with anticipation. He could almost hear Margaret's voice in his head, teasing him about his sudden soft spot for puppies. She had always wanted a dog, had begged him for years, but Daniel had been too stubborn, too caught up in his own routines to make room for one. He could see her now, laughing and shaking her head, her eyes sparkling with that familiar mischief. "Took you long enough," she would say, her voice warm and teasing. "You old softy." Daniel's chest tightened, his eyes stinging as he pictured her standing there, her hair tumbling over her shoulders, her smile bright and beautiful. He missed her so much it hurt, missed the way she filled the house with light and laughter, the way she loved him without reservation, without hesitation. But as he stood there, the box cradled in his arms, Daniel felt a flicker of peace, a warmth spreading through his chest. Maybe this was her way of giving him one last gift. Maybe she had sent that mother dog to him, knowing he needed something to fight for, someone to love. The thought brought tears to his eyes, and Daniel blinked them away, his shoulders trembling as he whispered a quiet prayer. "Thank you, Maggie," he murmured, his voice cracking. "I promise I won't let them down." The house felt warmer now, the air buzzing with new energy as Daniel moved through the rooms, preparing his home for the fragile lives he had vowed to protect. He could almost hear the patter of tiny paws, the soft whimpers of puppies exploring their new world. It was crazy, overwhelming, terrifying, but for the first time in 3 years, Daniel felt alive, and as the morning sun peeked through the frost-covered windows, casting a golden glow across the floor, he realized he was finally ready to live again. The snow crunched under Daniel's boots as he stepped out of his truck, the cold air biting at his face. The veterinary clinic stood quietly before him, its windows fogged with warmth, a stark contrast to the icy chill outside. His heart raced as he pushed open the door, the bell above jingling softly as he stepped inside. The familiar scent of antiseptic and dog fur filled his senses, and his gaze immediately drifted to the incubator against the wall, where 4 tiny puppies lay curled together, their little bodies rising and falling with each delicate breath. Relief washed over him, his shoulders sagging as he approached, his fingers brushing against the glass. They were so small, so impossibly fragile, but they were alive. He could see their tiny chests moving, their paws twitching as they dreamed. His heart squeezed, and Daniel let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. They had made it through the night. A soft voice broke through his thoughts, and he turned to see Dr. Myers standing in the doorway, her face lined with exhaustion, but softened by a gentle smile. "They're fighters," she said quietly, her eyes warm as she joined him by the incubator. "I was up every few hours feeding them, but they're holding on. And their mom, she's stronger today. Her temperature is stabilizing, and she's responding to the fluids. She even managed to lick one of the pups this morning." Daniel's throat tightened, his eyes burning with relief. He could picture it so clearly, the mother dog nuzzling her babies, her love for them stronger than her pain. She was fighting to stay with them, refusing to give up, and Daniel's admiration for her grew even deeper. "Can I see her?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Dr. Myers nodded, leading him down the hall to the recovery room. The door swung open, and Daniel's breath caught as he stepped inside. The mother dog lay on a soft bed, her body wrapped in warm blankets, her injured legs splinted and propped on a cushion. Her fur had been cleaned, revealing golden hues that glowed softly under the dim lights. Her eyes opened as he approached, her gaze locking onto his, and Daniel's heart swelled. There it was, that same trust, that same quiet plea for safety. He knelt beside her, his fingers trembling as he stroked her head, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're one tough girl, you know that?" Her eyes softened, a faint whimper escaping her lips as she pressed her head into his palm. Daniel's chest tightened, and he fought to keep his composure, his fingers tangling gently in her fur. "I'm taking you home," he promised, his voice cracking. "All of you. You're safe now. I swear it." She sighed, her body relaxing under his touch, her eyes fluttering shut as she drifted back to sleep. Daniel stayed beside her, his heart aching as he watched her breathe, his fingers brushing softly over her golden fur. He didn't know how he was going to do it, raising 4 puppies, caring for this injured mother, but he knew he couldn't let them go. They had been abandoned, thrown away like trash, but they were his now, his family, and he was going to protect them, no matter what. 3 days later, Daniel pulled up to the farmhouse with his truck loaded down with blankets, food bowls, and a pile of newspapers he'd picked up from the grocery store. The back seat was filled with tiny whimpers and soft snuffling noises as the puppies wriggled inside a makeshift crate, their little noses pressed against the slats as they sniffed curiously at the new scents. In the passenger seat, the mother dog lay curled on a thick blanket, her head resting on Daniel's coat. Her eyes half closed as she fought off exhaustion. She was still weak, her body thin and fragile, but she was alive. Her leg was splinted, her ribs were healing, and the light was slowly returning to her eyes. Daniel watched her for a moment, his heart aching with admiration. She had survived against all odds, and now she was coming home. He carried her inside first, cradling her gently as he navigated the snow-covered steps. She whimpered softly, her body trembling with pain, and Daniel murmured soothing words as he laid her down by the fireplace, tucking blankets around her for warmth. Her eyes fluttered open, her head lifting just enough to scan the room, her nose twitching as she took in her new surroundings. Daniel's chest tightened as he watched her, his heart pounding with anticipation. "This is your home now," he whispered, his voice soft. "I hope you like it." Her eyes met his, and for a brief moment, he thought he saw gratitude flicker in their amber depths. He hurried back outside to fetch the puppies, their tiny bodies wriggling with excitement as he carried the crate into the living room. They tumbled out in a flurry of golden fur, their little paws skittering across the hardwood floor as they explored their new world. One of them, a bold little pup with a splash of white on his chest, stumbled straight into Daniel's leg, his head tilting back as he looked up, his eyes wide and curious. Daniel laughed, his heart swelling as he scooped the puppy into his arms, the little body warm and soft against his chest. "Well, aren't you brave?" he teased, scratching the pup's ears. "I think I'll call you Scout." The name felt right, and Daniel smiled as he set Scout down, watching as the puppy scampered off to join his siblings. The other 3 were busy nosing around the blankets by the fireplace, their tiny tails wagging as they nuzzled against their mother. She lifted her head, her eyes softening as she watched them, a low whine escaping her lips. The puppies yipped in excitement, their little bodies pressing close to her as they nuzzled her face, their cries filled with joy and recognition. Daniel's heart twisted, his eyes stinging as he watched the reunion unfold. The mother dog licked each of her babies, her tongue gentle and warm as she cleaned their faces, her body trembling with relief. Her puppies climbed over her legs, their tails wagging furiously as they nestled against her belly, their tiny mouths searching for milk. Daniel turned away, his shoulders trembling as he wiped his eyes. He hadn't expected to feel this much, hadn't expected them to break through the walls he had built around his heart. But they had. They were his now, and he was theirs. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow across the snow-covered fields, Daniel sat by the fireplace, his heart full as he watched his new family settle into their home. The mother dog looked at him, her eyes warm and grateful, and Daniel smiled, his chest tightening with love. He still didn't know what the future held, didn't know if he was ready for the challenges ahead. But he knew one thing for certain: he wasn't alone anymore, and neither were they. Winter slowly loosened its icy grip on the farmhouse. the snow melting into muddy puddles as the first signs of spring peeked through the frost. Daniel stood on the porch, leaning against the wooden railing, his gaze drifting over the fields as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of pink and gold. The air was still cold, crisp with the last breath of winter, but there was warmth in the breeze, a promise of new beginnings. Behind him, the sound of tiny paws skittering across the hardwood floor brought a smile to his face. And Daniel turned just in time to see Scout barrel through the doorway, his golden fur gleaming in the evening light, his tail wagging furiously as he bounded toward the porch steps. "Hey, slow down there, buddy!" Daniel laughed, reaching out to steady the overexcited puppy as Scout nearly tumbled over his own paws. The little pup barked happily, his eyes sparkling with mischief as he licked Daniel's hand, his tiny tongue warm and wet against his skin. Before Daniel could catch his breath, the other three puppies appeared, tumbling out the door in a chaotic bundle of fur and energy. They yipped and growled playfully, wrestling with each other as they chased Scout around the porch, their tails wagging so fast they were a blur of golden fluff. Daniel watched them, his heart swelling with joy. They had grown so much over the past few weeks, their little bodies filling out, their legs growing stronger as they learned to run and play. They were healthy and happy, full of life and curiosity, and Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of pride as he watched them explore their world. But his gaze drifted past the playful puppies, his eyes softening as they settled on the figure lying in the sunlight by the porch steps. Peggy, the mother dog, rested her head on her paws, her eyes half closed as she watched her babies with a look of pure contentment. Her leg was still splinted, but she was stronger now, her ribs no longer visible beneath her golden coat, her fur glossy and clean. Daniel's chest tightened as he remembered how broken she had been when he first found her, lying in the snow, her body trembling with cold and pain. But she had fought, with every ounce of strength she had, and she had survived. She had protected her puppies even when she was too weak to stand, and she had taught Daniel more about love and courage than he ever thought possible. "You did good, Peggy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're a hero, you know that?" Peggy's ears twitched, her eyes flicking up to meet his, and her tail gave a slow, gentle wag, her gratitude shining through her warm amber gaze. Daniel's heart swelled, his throat tightening as he knelt beside her, his hand resting on her head, his fingers brushing through her soft fur. She leaned into his touch, a low sigh escaping her lips as she nuzzled his palm, her body relaxing under his care. They stayed like that for a while, the golden light of dusk wrapping around them, warm and comforting. Daniel felt a peace he hadn't known in years, a stillness settling over him as he watched the sun sink below the horizon, its light fading into the deep blue of evening. He had found something he didn't even know he was looking for, a purpose, a reason to keep going. He had found a family. The sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the quiet, and Daniel turned to see a car pulling into the driveway. The headlights flicked off, and the door opened as a familiar figure stepped out, her red hair catching the last rays of sunlight. "Evening, Sarah," Daniel called, waving as the young woman approached, a warm smile lighting up her face. Sarah worked at the local animal shelter, and she had been helping Daniel with the puppies, teaching him how to care for them, how to feed them and train them. She had become a friend, someone who understood his fears and his hopes, someone who shared his love for these little lives. "They're getting bigger every day," Sarah laughed as Scout ran up to greet her, his tail wagging so hard his whole body wiggled with excitement. "And faster, too. You're gonna have your hands full, Daniel." Daniel chuckled, his heart light as he watched her crouch down to pet the puppies, her laughter ringing out as they climbed over her lap, their little tongues licking her face. "Yeah, they keep me busy," he admitted, his eyes drifting to Peggy, who watched them with a mother's patience, her tail thumping softly against the porch. "But I wouldn't trade it for anything." Sarah's smile softened, her gaze flicking to Daniel, her eyes warm and understanding. "You've done an incredible thing, Daniel. You saved them, and they saved you too." Daniel's breath caught, his chest tightening as he looked away, his fingers brushing against Peggy's fur. "Yeah," he whispered, his voice rough. "I think they did." They stood together, watching the puppies play, their laughter mingling with the soft breeze as night settled over the farmhouse. The stars began to appear, tiny pinpricks of light against the vast dark sky, and Daniel felt something lift inside him, a weight he didn't realize he'd been carrying. He thought of Margaret, of her smile, of her laughter, and he knew she was watching, that she was proud of him. He had found a way to live again, to love again, and he knew she was a part of that. As the puppies grew tired, curling up beside Peggy on the porch, Daniel felt a warmth spread through his chest, a quiet, steady hope. They were safe now, his little family, and he would protect them with everything he had. He turned to Sarah, his eyes soft as he smiled. "I'm thinking about naming the place Second Chances," he said, his voice steady. "For them, and for me." Sarah's eyes sparkled, her smile wide and genuine. "I think that's perfect." They stood together, watching the stars, their shoulders brushing as the night wrapped around them, warm and peaceful. Daniel looked at his family, at the life he had built from the ashes of grief, and he knew that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. They were his second chance, his new beginning, and he was finally ready to live. This story reminds us of the power of compassion and the incredible resilience found in even the most fragile lives. It shows that love can heal the deepest wounds and that sometimes the most broken souls can bring the greatest hope. Daniel's journey from grief to healing teaches us that second chances come when we least expect them, often wrapped in the form of those who need us the most. By opening his heart and home, he found a new purpose, proving that acts of kindness not only save lives, but also mend hearts. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of hope, love, and redemption. Until next time, remember, compassion changes lives. See you in the next story.